Alright guys, so back today with some actual progress because some parts came in and I was finally able to get some stuff going and on the ball. So just to recap, engine and transmission out of car, transmission's been ordered, still ain't here yet, still saying it's on the way. Same situation as before. They did give me, they said 30 to 45 days, right? So that's better, I guess. But anyways, in the last video, I think I mentioned that I ordered the Edelbrock E Street heads. Well, they was on back order and they kept just moving the ship date further and further and further back. So I ended up splurging a little bit and I just said, screw it. They was in stock, I bought it. So these are the TrickFlow 240 heads. 240 CNC heads on the exhaust side, on the intake side, and the combustion chamber. So way too nice for me, but anyways, the only bad news about these heads is that it said that it would not fit a 383. Well, it didn't say 383 specifically, it just said that you needed a minimum bore size of 4.32, I think it said 4.3 something, and the 383 comes from the factory with a 4 1/4 bore size, so 4.25, right? So there were some people on there that said that they would fit a 383, just the valves would be shrouded a little bit, so pretty much the valve would be too close to the side of the cylinder wall that the air would be hard to flow around the valve, right? I mean, it would still flow around, obviously it's getting forced in, but it just wouldn't be as efficient, or you'd probably lose a couple horsepower or whatever. But so I bought it anyways. I bought one because they only had one in stock and the other one will be like 7 weeks, but I bought one, took my old head off. I don't have a set of calipers. I'm actually about to go and buy some right now because I'm checking push rod length. But I measured the bore with a tape measure. So 4 1/4 is factory. This was sitting at 4 5/16. So a 16th over, which is roughly 60 thousandths. 16th is like 62.5 thousandths, right? So now of course that's just me holding it with a tape, so it's probably not very accurate. So I mean, but anyways, I'm not holding a tape measure a 16th of an inch off. I use a tape every single day at work. I promise you I'm not holding it a 16th of an inch off. It might not be a full 60 thousandths overboard, but it's something overboard. So I'm feeling pretty confident that these heads clear. And actually, I just, I got a push rod in right now. So this is a push rod length checker. So I don't even know if you're gonna be able to see it, but yeah, you can see it right there. So that nut, and there's like a little adjuster there. So you can adjust the length of this push rod just that way you could check everything. And I just turned the engine over several times. There's no physical valve interference, but now I don't have any clay sitting on top of the piston, so it could be dangerously close. It could be like 20 thousandths off or 10 thousandths off, where it won't hit, but it will be way too close for running the engine. And I wouldn't doubt it, just because these are, as you can tell, true flat top pistons. There are no valve reliefs, no nothing. So the piston to valve clearance is definitely a little close on this. And the fact that these have, I think, 2.19 intake valves. So I went ahead and threw it on the intake side. So that way, see, now that's the biggest valve. That's gonna be the one I'd be worried about the most. The exhaust valve is smaller, so it's gonna have more clearance naturally. Seeing how this cam is the same lift on both exhaust and intake. It just has split duration. So it's 545 lifts on both, and then duration is 241, 246 split, which is generally, I mean, that's kind of a mild to rowdy camshaft for a big block Mopar. But the one that was in here was a Crane Fireball cam, and it's like 447 thousandths lift and 221 duration. So 447, 221, now I'm at 545 and 246. So a whole extra 100 thousandths of lift and a whole another 20 degrees of duration. Plus CNC heads. I mean, it's gonna be decent. So as you can tell, new oil pan's on, 7-quart oil pan. I put the correct 7-quart pickup tube in there. As you can tell, oil pan studs. This is a windage tray gasket combo. So usually on big block Mopars, it'll go gasket, windage tray, gasket, oil pan. Well, they make a gasket windage tray combo. So eliminates that. Put a new rear main seal in while I was at it, just because I'm already there. Might as well fucking do it before it leaks. While it's in the car. Now I gotta pull the whole engine out. I will be replacing the freeze plugs. I already got 2 of them replaced on the other side, and this one underneath the motor mount I replaced a couple months ago while it was in the car, which was a pain in the ass, but I did it. So that one's new. I'm gonna go ahead and replace that one, and then the one underneath the motor mount on the passenger side of the engine. As you can tell, all ARP hardware, ARP valve cover studs, which anybody that's messed with valve cover gaskets, you know that's a blessing. ARP harmonic damper bolt, which this bolt alone was like 30 bucks, and then Mopar bolts for the front cover, which I already threw the camshaft in, tightened it up, of course. New timing set, it's a double roller timing chain. Trying to think what else. That's pretty much it, to be honest. And then of course everything's torn apart, and then you know everything over here, the correct offset rocker arms for this side, the rocker shaft, the hold downs, the ARP studs and nuts, and Allen wrench for it, and then yeah. So oh, and I bought a new intake, which is laying over there. And I know some people are going to disagree with this, but I went with the Edelbrock Performer RPM intake just because I wanted a dual plane intake. Even though these are crazy heads, CNC, they're going to flow way better on a single plane intake, but I'm just not revving the engine to make a single plane, you know, useful in my mind. They just, single planes don't really make that good of low end torque, and I had a single plane on there before. It was that that intake right over there, the Edelbrock Torquer, and I don't know, I just didn't like it. I'd rather have low end torque, low end horsepower, and lose, you know, 25 horsepower max up top, but gain so much more at the bottom and throughout the whole curve that it's just, I don't know. But yeah, so threw the rocker arms on, and of course, you know, these are offset, so you know the adjuster nut on this one is to the right, adjuster nut on that one's to the left. It all comes in there. You just got to figure it out yourself. But I mean, you can look down at the hole where the push rod goes, and you can see that, you know, that's right in line. Whereas if it had this one on this side, then it would be like over here into the machined area. So pretty simple. Then of course springs in between them, and then you could put spacers right there in that gap if this was off from the rocker tip. So left to right on the rocker tips, all of these are dead center. And the geometry of these, of course, with it being on a shaft, is already preset. So the fulcrum point on these is this shaft. So of course it's preset, so there's nothing to worry about north and south, like this way, like, you know, front to back on this rocker or on this valve tip right there. So all you gotta do whenever you're setting a push rod length is just this little adjuster nut. They say to put it like a 1.5 threads out the bottom of the rocker arm, just because if you have more than that, then you're gonna lose a little bit of the lift, just because of the drastic angle that it's gonna be at. So yeah, 1.5 threads, set this to where it's tight, and then lock that down and everything. And the only movement right there is the lifter, just because these are hydraulic lifters. So that should be the correct rocker arm, or it should be the correct push rod length. But of course, I'm about to go right now buy some digital calipers, or buy some type of calipers. I don't think I have. Yeah, I don't have any calipers. So buy some digital calipers, and then check that, and hopefully it's close to stock push rod length, so that way I don't have to custom order anything, or hopefully it's close to some off-the-shelf push rod length, so that way I don't have to custom order push rods, because that's going to be expensive and I don't feel like doing that. But yeah, kick-ass head so far. And I want to do this, and I want to set up, so I'm also going to move that push rod. I'm going to lock it down, move the push rod over to the exhaust side, set this adjuster nut to where it needs to be at, and then make sure that it's going to be the same length, which it should be, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. So yeah, move that over there. And then I found a company on eBay selling this head, and they claimed they got 5 in stock. And I emailed them last night and asked again. I was like, hey, you know, like, do y'all have 5 in stock? Because TrickFlow was saying it's going to be 7 weeks before they get the castings to make more. And the dude claims that they got 5 in stock that are ready to ship. So I don't know. I might try it out. It's $1,100, but I want to hurry up and get this engine done, so that way whenever the transmission comes in, I'm not still putting the engine together. Because right now the garage is a complete mess. Got oil pan over there. Over here there's, you know, the old valve covers and the whole rocker assemblies and valve train and everything. And then there's heads and alternator, starter, intake, fan, all this bullshit in here. I mean, it's going to be even more once I get the transmission in because of all of its parts that come in the kit. I'm not even trying to mess with it. So hopefully I'll have this all together, because the new Valley pan is coming in today. I have the billet aluminum hold down bars. I got brand new ARP bolts for the Valley pan. I got brand new ARP intake bolts. Everything should be good to go, I think. I hope. But yeah, so that's the update. I am going to be buying a new oil pump just because, yet again, with new camshaft being in there, I don't want there to be any reason for any failures. So new oil pump. I'm going to buy a new fuel pump too, just because, I mean, it's already off. You know, I think a new oil pump is $100. New fuel pump, depending on what I go with, is like $100 to $180. Just because I was looking at like the Holley and like the Carter and like the Edelbrock stuff. So, but I mean, to me, yeah, I mean, it's expensive, but I'd rather do it right now while it's out of the cart, where it's easy to get to and everything's just simple. And might as well have all new parts anyways. And then I still got to pull the steering box out of this car because it's leaking and I don't feel like rebuilding it. So I'm just going to pull it out, buy a new one. New spark plugs. And then just wait on the transmission. Alright, so not over yet. I figured I'd include this video as a little PSA to make sure you pay attention when you're throwing in the timing set, right? So the gears for the crank and the camshaft. So this engine, or this crankshaft, is a single keyway crankshaft, which is standard, right? You only get double keyway crankshafts whenever you start getting into like blower motors and stuff, right? So it's a single keyway crankshaft, but a lot of aftermarket companies like Comp, like Crane, Lunati, all the camshaft companies, whenever you buy a timing set from them, the gears, they will put several different keyways on the crankshaft for the Woodruff key, right? So that way you could advance and retard the camshaft by the crank gear, you know what I'm saying? So this one had 3 different slots. One had an O, one had an A, and one had an R right above the slot for the keyway, right? So I'm assuming that the O stood for original, A stood for advanced, and R stood for retard, right? So I threw it on straight up, just on the O, because I'm not getting that big into degree in the camshaft and everything. Like, I mean, degree in the camshaft really only matters just to check to make sure that the cam is what the manufacturer says it is, or if you're doing like a custom degree, then that would, you know, you could like check to make sure that it's right? But I'm just throwing it in straight up. I'm gonna trust the camshaft manufacturer, right? So though that O, A, and R is right above the keyways, right? Well, I wasn't paying attention that on the teeth, of course, there's also a corresponding O, A, and R that you line up with a dot on the camshaft gear, right? So crank gear, there will be there was an O and A and R around the teeth that you line up with a dot that's on the camshaft gear. And I already put it all back together now, right? But so I wasn't paying attention. The O, so I put on O on the keyway, but on the teeth of the crank gear, the A looked like an arrow. So I just fucking threw it at the dot on the camshaft gear, right? Threw it all together. Of course, I wasn't paying attention to the orientation of the camshaft lobes in comparison to top dead center of the #1 piston. I just fucking put it together, put the adjustable push rod in there, which I got set right there. And this should be the proper length that I need. So threw that in there, and I threw it on the intake side first, just because I know that the intake valve is way bigger than the exhaust valve. So I figured that if there would be any piston to valve clearance problems, it would be on the intake side. So I was gonna go ahead and take care of that right away. Well, it turned over just fine after I got everything set. So I set the adjuster on the rocker arm, and then I set the push rod to the right length, and then boom, turned it over. Everything was just fine. Threw it on the exhaust side just to check to make sure. Theoretically, they're the same. Actually, not theoretically, literally, the push rod for the exhaust side and the push rod for the intake side are the same length on a big block Mopar besides Hemis. Of course, Hemis have different length push rods for exhaust and intake, but a regular big block doesn't. But I threw it over there just to check to make sure it's the same length, of course. But as I was turning it over, the valve hit the piston right before top dead center. And I was like, oh shit. And then, you know, of course I start looking online, this, that, the other. Everything starts running through my head. Like, oh, do I get these pistons fly cut? Like, do I get valve release fly cut into these pistons? Do I get a smaller camshaft? Do I get rid of these heads because they have such big ass valves? Like, what do I do? So I was Googling it, and people on Google were saying that if you advance the camshaft, then that will help exhaust valve piston clearance, but it will hurt intake valve piston clearance, right? Well, the intake valve was fine on piston clearance. It was the exhaust valve that had a problem. So I pulled everything off, and I was going to advance the camshaft into the advanced spot, and that's when I noticed my mess up, that there's a corresponding O, A, and R on the teeth that I had to line up. And I put the A to the dot on the camshaft gear just because I thought it was an arrow and not an A. So then I took the cam gear off, or I took it all off, and then realigned everything, put it back on to where the O tooth is lined up with the dot on the camshaft gear. So, you know, I have the O keyway lined up with the Woodruff key. So threw it all back together, tightened everything down. Or actually, before I even threw the timing cover back on, I went ahead, turned the engine over on both intake and exhaust with the correct length push rod. And of course, I'm using a solid lifter in here. Where is it? Oh, right there. So I made a little solid lifter. I just took one of the old lifters. I took the guts out of the inside of it, and then I put something in there. As you can tell, it's just a nut in there that's at the same height roughly, and then of course the push rod sits down in there just a little bit, just like a regular lifter. So you see, like that lifter, there's like that recess in there where the push rod will sit. So the nut kind of creates that, and it's probably not dead accurate. It's probably gonna be, you know, 30-40 thousandths off or whatever, but that's fine because I have adjustable rocker arms and I can set it to what I want. But you need to either use solid lifters or create your own solid lifters, just because if you use a hydraulic lifter that still has all the guts in it, then of course that plunger in there will compress whenever it's coming around onto the lobe, and then you won't get a true reading for you know, your push rod length, just because the lifter is not pumped up with oil. So it's going to like squish a lot. So then that's going to take up some of the lift, and then you're going to, you know, think your piston and valve clearance is fine. You're going to think a shorter push rod is good, or a longer push rod, or whatever. So you got to be using a solid lifter, right? But yeah, no, I just thought I would include this video as a little PSA to pay attention to what you're doing whenever you're putting together an engine. And usually I'm good about this stuff. This isn't the first engine I've put together. This isn't the first engine I've just done a cam swap on. This ain't the first time for this, but I just wasn't paying attention to A looked like an arrow, and I wasn't thinking that, yeah, there's gonna be a different tooth corresponding to each you know, keyway slot. So just pay attention.